I'm live. I continue reading A Lot to Remember. This is a book by Joan Marshall Grant about a lot of France, an area in France, which she visited quite often. This is dedicated to Denys and Charles, both were her husband at different times. With love, for a lot to remember, she wrote. We are here in chapter 20, and it's entitled EVENSONG. The following morning, a piercing shriek from Madame Rocher sent me hurling to the kitchen, convinced I should find her bleeding or boiled or burnt, for I had not yet learned that, had she been feeling anguish, either mental or physical, she would have expressed it by extreme understatement. After admonishing me for risking a fall by running so fast down the stairs, she exclaimed that she had only been rebuking Tayo, who gets caricature of a beagle for stealing an egg. Tayo used to snatch the eggs from my poor hens almost before they were laid. But the new rooster is fierce and pecks him, so he has the audacity to creep in here and steal them from under my nose, she said indignantly, while pouring for me a restorative cup of coffee. I do not mind a dog being greedy, nor a dog who pretends to soft-hearted visitors that he is starving, when in fact he has already stuffed himself until he can hardly swallow. She paused, and I knew this was my cue to confess that for our first few days we too had been deceived by Tayo. He put on such a pathetic expression that we were bullied into sharing our meals with him, but we thought we did it so discreetly that you hadn't noticed. She was swept by a gale of laughter. That was very generous of you, if not very discerning. How could I fail to know what you were doing when there was grease on the floor after every meal, even more of it than when the poor dear artist with a weak stomach who was deaf sat at the same table. Now you understand why I call it my table d'anglaise. But drink your coffee in peace, for this morning we shall not again be disturbed by Tayo, who has stolen his 6th egg. One must admit that Tayo is an intelligent dog, and not merely a good actor. Most people cannot stop acting, but not every dog can count up to 6. Always 6 eggs he steals, and one by one he carries them to his picnic place in the sight of the castle, and only when all 6 are collected does he start to eat them. She went to the door and shouted, "Huguette, picnic!" Then, after picking up a knife, she started to prepare haricots verts, while explaining that Huguette would now go to Tayo's picnic place in time to rescue the eggs unbroken. Huguette would then scold him, put on his collar, and chain him to the letterbox beside her front door. But of course she gives him a rug to sit on, and it's not too severe punishment, for he knows it will only last for half an hour. At this point Charles came into the kitchen, and we helped her with the beans until she suddenly leapt to her feet, exclaiming, "We shall be late at the Dauras." Without giving us time to tidy ourselves, she swept us down the narrow street which leads from the back door at an angle more suitable for toboggans, talking so fast that we gathered only that she loved the Dauras, who would therefore love us, that they had returned home from America late last night, and that they were people of acute perception, who would be delighted to receive us at 11 o'clock in the morning. We arrived precipitately at the house which George had pointed out as being one of the glories of La Popie, built in the 13th century as a hospital under the care of the bishops of Cahors. Madame Rocher banged on the door, and after warmly embracing the woman who opened it, announced, "Here are 2 friends who are impatient to meet you," and then left us. In spite of finding two total strangers, embarrassed and dishevelled on her doorstep, Louise Daura and her husband Pierre accepted us as serenely on that first morning as they did on so many other mornings when we came on the pretense of working to the studio they lent us at the top of their garden. They had found La Papille in 1926 and bought the house which gradually they had restored until it seemed unchanged by the passing of half a dozen centuries. The studio had been the house of a 17th century gilt worker, which Pierre had rescued from demolition by transporting it to La Papille stone by stone. No two people could have been more congruous in that setting, for Pierre is not only a fine artist and sculptor, but looks as though he might have been the medieval model of a saint for Chartres Cathedral. And Louise radiates the same calm wisdom, lively with affectionate insight. We had only known each other a few days when Louise heard on the grapevine, which is usually more reliable than Lautois' telephones, that an ancient chateau of outstanding beauty, with its entire contents of objects even more outstandingly beautiful, was for sale. The grapevine is rather vague about the exact locality, but I gather it is not far from Vers, said Louise, and the name is something like Girondelle. After scrutinizing the map, we found Gironde, in the smallest type, close to the rectangle which indicates a minor chateau. So the three of us set out to look for it. Pierre, although interested in our envisaged treasures, having refused to be seduced from his painting. We took the main Cahors road, the number 662, until Vers, and then branched off onto the D49 to Coeurs. Here I directed operations along a track which became increasingly narrow until it petered out in a huddle of derelict cottages, perched on the brink of a steep valley. No road, no chateau, said Charles briskly. In spite of the evidence, I still believed I was on the beam, so before we could turn the car, I hopped out and approached an old woman who was staring suspiciously at us across a dung heap. At first she pretended to be deaf and seemed as ill-tempered as her two wolfish dogs, which circled round me snarling. The Chateau de Gironde? It is for sale? Is it near here? Suddenly her wrinkled lips cracked open with a smile, showing a solitary tooth, white as the kernel of a fresh walnut. So we had come to visit the chateau? We must forgive her the stupidity of not instantly recognizing that we were friends. She had mistaken us for strangers. We would be most welcome. Perhaps it would be easier to leave the car in her care, as the road was not quite suitable for so large a vehicle. She conducted us to the gap between two barns and pointed to the path we must follow, which led through steep and stony fields. It soon became steeper. Among stunted oaks, slippery slabs of rock alternated with patches of loose stones which turned underfoot and rolled clattering down the hillside. We climbed two dry stone walls, the first treacherous with strands of rotting barbed wire, the second lively with lizards. Then there was a sudden blaze of scarlet ahead of us, poppies that almost hid the spare blades of corn in a narrow field. A little further on, there was another field, with a thin crop of potatoes growing feebly in the stony ground. The stunted oaks closed in again as the path widened enough for us no longer to have to walk in a single file. Abruptly, we came to an open space of turf, purple with time, its scent pungent in the hot sunlight. Beyond the purple sward were the grey stone walls, the rust-red pantiles of a derelict building. Had it ever been a chateau? perhaps, for there was a round tower, traces of walls which had once enclosed a courtyard, an imperishable elegance in the setting of the windows. Something moved in the shadow of a grapevine which sprawled among the boughs of an ancient plum tree. An old woman hobbled painfully into the sunlight, using a forked branch as a crutch. She called out an eager welcome. Her wispy white hair hung loose to her bowed shoulders, and her black clothes were held together with twine and safety pins. Why was she so pleased to see us? Who did she think we were? I know you would come soon, she said. I kept telling him you would soon come. Louise tried to explain, to apologize for our intrusion, but she did not listen. You must not mind my taking you into the kitchen, she said, beckoning us to follow her. You must forgive everything here being a little untidy. If I had known you were coming today, I could have opened the shutters, prepared a meal for you. The walls and ceiling of the kitchen were blackened with smoke from the huge fireplace, and so little daylight filtered through the broken slats that for a moment I did not see the old man sitting in a high-backed walnut chair by the hearth. He tried to get up, but she gently forbade him, assuring him that we would forgive him his apparent discourtesy. His heart is very weak, she whispered me. He must not exert himself. Her husband bowed to each of us in turn and asked us to be seated. I saw there was only one other chair in the room, a small rush-seated chair that had one of its legs mended with copper wire, and that the only other furniture was a massive refectory table, 2 wooden stools and a grandfather clock. But I knew that this was not the hospitality he offered. It belonged to an earlier setting, when fine woods wove the sheen of beeswax and silk damask from Lyon folded against bright walls. His eyes were calm and clear as his voice, blue as the veins on his long, sensitive hands born to guide a pen or a rapier instead of a plough. His wife, seeing that he was happy talking to Charles, beckoned to Louise and me to follow her into the adjoining room. He does not like to concern himself with business, she said. It is we who will discuss the sale. I'm afraid we have not come to buy the house, said Louise humbly. She brushed this aside. It is too soon to speak of money matters. I wish to show you my beautiful things. She hobbled eagerly from room to room, 6 large rooms of fine proportions, whose walls still bore traces of 18th century gilding. In each there was an enormous cupboard, 14 or more feet high, the panels carved deep into planks of solid walnut. Each room had a walnut bed, a lit de bateau, one sheltered by curtains hung from the ceiling of silk so tattered that the original rose colour was grey as the cobwebs which festooned them. From each bed she stripped off the worn covers so that we could see the plumpness of the feather mattress she had made from geese of her own plucking. I cannot sleep in a good bed any longer, she said regretfully. A soft bed makes my back hurt too much, so I spend the night in my little chair by the hearth. A board under the mattress would help, I said. It is better for your back to be straight when it is painful. How do you know? Because after I hurt my back, I used to sleep on a mattress on the floor. All last winter I slept like that. You hurt your back as I did, and yet you walk without a stick? You walked from the road? That is good news. I wish You had been here to tell the doctors in Cahors that they were fools. When they said I would never recover from my fall last autumn. She patted me on the shoulder. I have the rheumatism. Rheumatism. It is nothing. Everyone has the rheumatism. All doctors are fools. 3. Well, I read the last sentence again and then I finish here for now. Everyone has the rheumatism. All doctors are fools. 3 years ago my husband had a great bleeding from his stomach and they cut him open in the hospital at Cahors. They said he could not live more than 3 months. 3 years ago they told me that, because they would not believe that I could look after him so well. Of course I can look after him. I'm much younger, much stronger than he is. He thought he, though you would not believe it, was 86-year-old last February, and I shall be only 81 next May. Now I shall sleep like you did on hard boards and soon throw away this stupid stick. Where shall I find boards? Of course, the shelves of my linen press. We helped her to arrange the bed. The shelves were so heavy that we could only just lift them. She lay down for a moment and insisted that for the first time for many days she was free from pain. I wished I could have believed that the nagging ache would not return as soon as there was nothing to deflect her attention from it. If only there had been something to buy that was small enough to carry away, but it would have taken an ox cart to transport the least massive piece of her remaining furniture. And there was no road for the ox cart. She must have felt our embarrassment. You must blame my stupid eyesight for mistaking you for the people who had come to buy, she said gently. I'm doubly fortunate that they did not come today, for they would have kept me bargaining when I wished to be free to entertain you. She opened the cupboard and brought out a dusty, half-empty bottle of rough Taffia and 3 glasses. I think it was her last, but it would have been an unforgivable insult to refuse it or to offer to pay. They will come tomorrow, she said again after she had taken a glass to Charles. They, the people who will buy the house and the furniture, have not let us know when they are coming, so we do not yet know who they will be. But of course they will come soon, for it is over a month since a friend from the village put an advertisement about the chateau in the newspapers. Okay, I stop this here and I finish this chapter before long. Oh my goodness, it's so... Is it only... No, I finish it now. She insisted on refilling our glasses. You must come to visit us when we are living in Cahors. With the money from the sale of this fine property we shall buy a small house, which will be very easy for me to look after. It will no longer matter that I cannot dig this garden as well as I used to, or that I am not so quick now at chopping wood for the fire. Always there must be a fire, even in summer, for my husband feels the cold now that he cannot move very much. When I want vegetables, I shall buy them in the market, and I shall buy wine there too. And my husband will have people of his own kind to talk to, educated people. For a moment she looked sad. Then she said confidently, but he will always need me to look after him. He has always needed me. She stood in the doorway of the house that had no road leading to it, waving to us as we went away. She was sure that tomorrow or the next day a buyer would come, as a child is sure of the coming of Santa Claus. Chapter 21 on snails and serpents. Today is the 13th of November.